Today is Tuesday, December the 4th, 2014. I am Joan Gremont and Lynette Rakusen is with me, and we are interviewing you as part of the Roots to Boots Oral History Project, part of the Oral History Project also of the Dallas Jewish Historical Society. And we are very happy to be here in your beautiful home interviewing you today.
Thank you for coming.
Let's talk about life in South Africa and when your family first came to South Africa and where they came from and what you know about their early years in South Africa.
So my grandparents, my mother's parents, came probably I would guess she was 5 years old when they came. And she was born in 1928, so they came 33. 1930.
23. You said your mom was born in 28.
I mean in 23, excuse me.
And where did they come from?
They came from Lithuania, from Vilna, the town of Vilna.
And your father's side?
My father's side came much earlier. My father was born in Cape Town, and he was born in 23, so his parents must have come in the early 20s.
Okay, and do you know anything about your parents' early life in South Africa?
My mother's father was a mason in Vilna, and my father's father, actually don't know a lot about him, except that I think he was in the rag trade.
Okay.
I think he was a tailor, or he was something with fabric and manufacturing.
Okay. All right, so tell us about your own life growing up in South Africa, your family, your schooling,
where you lived. It was a wonderful life. I know that's probably a common thread with everybody's interview. It was a wonderful life. It was carefree. We weren't a wealthy family, but we had everything we needed. My mother never worked. My father worked very hard. He was a partner in a stone foundry, and he was in business with my uncle, actually my father's sister's husband. That's the connection. Anyway, they were in business together, and they worked very hard, and my mother was always a stay-at-home mother until about, I guess I was in high school, early high school years. She decided she needed a career, so she bought a company called Judy's Pickles, which is probably even a familiar name to you. It was a very well-known brand of pickled onions, and she bought the company. I don't think it was for a lot of money, because my parents didn't have a lot of money, and she loved her little business. She was a real businesswoman. The company grew, and she was very proud of it. Then, unfortunately, in 1973, my father got ill, and she let the company go. She just didn't have the time or the energy for it, and that just dissolved. I think it's still ongoing, though. I think they still make Judy's Pickles in South Africa.
So you met Lawrence in
I met Lawrence
South
that
Africa.
same year, in 1973. My father was on his deathbed. 2 weeks before he died, actually, I met Lawrence. He had asked me out for dinner, and I went, and
You got married when?
we got married 3 years later,
And
in
tell us
76.
when your children were born.
And the kids were born in 1980, but those 4 years between the time that we were married and by the time I had my family, I was always pregnant and always miscarrying. That was the state of my life for the next 4 years. Fortunately, the last pregnancy worked out. I was hospitalized for my entire pregnancy, and I had a most incredible doctor who my children know all about. In fact, I think they think I love him more than their father. And so they were born in May of 1980, and what I was going to say was, in terms of the immigration, even while we dated, Lawrence spoke about emigrating. And he always said, this is my plan, so tell me now, because if you're not interested in emigrating, you know, we can call this relationship off. And I said, oh no, that's fine with me.
So even though you had triplets, you knew you were going to leave one day.
Yes.
And what was the final thing that made the decision to leave?
Well, actually, I have to just backtrack a little bit and tell you that our original plan was to go via Israel. Because at the time that we decided we were now married and we were going to emigrate, it was really very hard to get into the States. And so our immigration lawyer had suggested to us that we use Israel as a stepping stone, go to Israel first, and then from Israel with an Israeli passport to come to the United States. That plan actually fell apart when I found I was pregnant with 3. And I said to Lawrence, there's no ways I'm going to Israel with 3 infants. And he agreed, and we decided to shelve that plan. Then thereafter, we met another lawyer who said, no, we could still file for US papers and it should be okay. And what happened is the papers, our green cards came through earlier than we had expected. And our children were only 14 months at the time, 15 months. And I said to Lawrence, can we just have a little more time in Cape Town with all the nannies there? And he said, fine. We came over to the States, picked up our green card, stayed a couple of weeks, and went back with the kids, in coach.
You brought the kids
in coach.
on the trip? What?
We had to, because they each had their own green card. So we had to bring them. And then we stayed for a couple of weeks in Houston and in a little apartment in Houston. And then we came back to Cape Town and we kind of made plans and packed up, and in the following February we came. So they were like 23 months.
So what was your family's reaction to your decision to leave?
It wasn't one of shock. They were, well, my father had already passed away, so it was my mother. My mother was absolutely supportive, and she thought it was a really good decision, a hard decision, and not easy for her. She was going to be losing 3 grandchildren, but she knew it was the best for us, and she still had 2 children left in Cape Town, so she wasn't going to be totally alone. Lawrence's parents, were totally supportive.
And how did you come to choose Dallas as your new home?
No really good reason.
Right.
It's crazy, but when we had made our first trip to the States in 1978 or 79, we went all over. We went from New York across country to LA, San Diego. We went all over, and in our innocence, we thought the East Coast was too cold, the West Coast was too drug infested, and so we needed to find somewhere in the middle. And our choices were going to be Atlanta, Houston, Dallas, and like all wandering Jews, we thought we would start off in one town. We thought there were towns, and we would just see if we could make a go of things. If things worked out, we would stay. If they didn't, we'd move on to the next town, but it worked out and we stayed.
So let's look at your early years in Dallas, and you came in a pretty early wave of immigrants.
It's a blur.
It's a blur. So can you remember in what ways were others helpful when you first arrived, and how did you find the community welcoming?
I think our children were key to us settling in and settling down really without a hiccup. I think triplets at that time was something of a useful situation. People were amazed that we had actually emigrated with triplets. So it was really a very easy transition. We first were in a little apartment, which I don't care to recall about that. Then we moved into a rental house, which was great. We had all the space we needed. And we settled down easily. We made friends easily. The children were the conduit. We made friends through their school. They were at Solomon Schechter. I don't ever remember feeling this is hard, or what want to go back to South Africa. It was just an easy transition for me and for the children. The children knew no different.
Were there any experiences that you remember that involved adjustment issues that were so different from what you were used to? No,
One
nannies
night,
for one.
I can only remember one thing that sticks in my mind. Hilton and Veronique and Lawrence and I were in this apartment building, and we needed to do laundry. And so Lawrence watched our kids, Hilton watched their kids, and Veronique and I decided to go to the Safeway at Spring Valley and Coit. And for those that don't know, Spring Valley and Coit in 1982 was not a great neighborhood. It wasn't like Highland Park. We go to the grocery store, and Veronique and I are looking for washing powder, and we're standing and we're looking at the washing powder, and I said to Veronique, how are we supposed to know which one to buy?
Yeah.
There's like 30 different types. In South Africa, there was just one, and it was Omo. And we had a giggle, and I think maybe even a tear or two. Can't remember the details exactly. But it was a shock. We felt a little lost that night. But then we got over it. We laughed. We came back to our dingy apartment, and we got on with life.
And did you work in Dallas when you got here?
Briefly, I did. I worked for Brian Ellman, actually, as a radiographer at his practice on Coit Road. He had a satellite office on Coit Road.
And is that the same occupation that you had in South
Yeah.
Africa?
Yeah.
Okay. So tell us about your introduction to the Dallas Jewish community, and how did it compare to your experience in South Africa, and how did you get involved in congregations, or you had said your children were Jewish?
Well, the kids were at Solomon Schechter, so it was easy. Got involved in the PTA. I was chair of the PTA. We got involved in Jewish Federation. It was just a natural. My mother was always involved in Mogen David Adom, and I just knew that that was something that I was going to do, and I just got involved in it. My kids were in the environment, and I wanted to partake.
So fast forward, and let's look at South African Jewish cultural traditions that you followed, and that your children, do they follow any of those?
Well, growing up with the kids, we always did Shabbat. Always. In South Africa we did it, and that was something that we were adamant that we were going to continue. And that was all well and good while they were in the Hebrew Day School. Things fell apart a little when they got into high school, and Bevan wanted to go to soccer games on a Friday night. It was never football, but for Bevan it was a soccer game. So we came to an agreement that we would always have Shabbat together, and then afterwards they could go out.
Right.
That was the one tradition we continued. We were never religious in South Africa. We were traditional Jews, and we never really went to shul other than the Jewish holidays, even in South Africa. So we continued the same tradition here. It was a little different for us when we joined Shereth Israel, because we weren't used to some of the traditions here. We weren't used to sitting men and women together. We weren't used to women being counted in the minyan or going up to read from the Torah. So that took a little bit of adjustment, but we figured that was the shul we needed to be at, because our children were at Solomon Schechter. That was the shul that was affiliated to the school.
And how important was Israel to you growing up in South Africa?
Always.
And how do you feel about that
Always.
today?
Israel was always important to us. I had my father's brother lived in Israel, and my mother had literally hundreds of cousins in Israel. And so we were always committed to Israel. I think my parents' first trip overseas as a married couple was to Israel, and it was a very important trip for them. And then afterwards, whenever they had extra money, that was where they went. They went back to Israel We always loved Israel. And to this day, Lawrence and I adore going to Israel. Last year, 2013, Lawrence went 3 times, I went twice.
Wow.
We love Israel.
So once you were here, did you arrange for other friends or extended family to join you, and who came and when?
Well, Hilton and Veronique and their family emigrated with us on the same plane. Lawrence's siblings were always planning to come once there was a business established for them to come to. My sister, Ethne, and her husband, ex-husband and family also wanted to get out of South Africa, and they did come, I think 3 or 4 years after we did. They came to live in Dallas with their children.
So you have a lot of family here.
They are no longer living here
Right.
in Dallas. They now live in Atlanta.
Okay. And since immigrating to Dallas, how has your family grown, and describe your family members and where they are now?
Well, yeah, the family has grown, but unfortunately not in Dallas. Our children all married people from New York. Believe it or not, it's crazy. Penny met her husband on a cruise that we were on. He was with his family. They were from New York. Bevan met his wife, also an ex-New Yorker, living in New York, and Emma too. So all 3 of our kids live in New York, and so our family has grown, and we now have 5 grandchildren, which is really the most important part, because the kids really don't count anymore. But they're all in New York, so whilst our family has grown, unfortunately not here in Dallas.
Okay. And do you still have family in South Africa?
I do. I have a sister, and she unfortunately lost her husband in 1993, Brian Lewin. She's got 2 children, 2 daughters, and one of them is married and has a husband, Daron, and 3 little kids. And extended family. We've got cousins from Lawrence's side and from my side, and aunts and uncles.
And of course you go back to visit them, I'm sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
And what, if anything, do you miss about life in South Africa?
In South Africa, I felt that I was Jewish, and I didn't need to prove it in any way. Here, I feel like I have to make it known that I'm Jewish. There, everybody knew everybody. Everybody knew, if you didn't know a family, you knew of a family, and you knew they were Jewish, or they weren't Jewish. Here, I feel you have to go a little bit further with your effort to make it known that you're Jewish.
Interesting. And you have US citizenship, and do you consider yourself an American?
100%. 100%. But when I do go back to South Africa, I don't forget my roots.
Right.
I remember them, and I enjoy the memories, but I'm happy still to come back and be an American here.
So are you glad you came to Dallas?
Very glad.
Okay.
Very, very glad. It was a wonderful city to raise our family. It was wonderful. It worked out for my husband, and we've had a wonderful life. We have wonderful family, friends. We have a really nice life.
Is there anything I didn't cover that you'd like to talk about?
I miss the South African chocolate.
Yeah, right, right. And tell us about the things next year.
So these are porcelain dolls. They were my mother's. And when I think of life in my house in Orange, I think of these dolls. And so when my mother passed away, me and my 2 sisters sat around a table and put my mother's prized possessions on the table and said, okay, what do you want? What do you want? And before anybody could say anything, I said, I want these. So I wrapped them up and schlepped them back, and unfortunately they broke on the plane. They smashed into smithereens, but you'd never say so, because I think they look beautiful too.
Wow.
Had them restored.
Beautiful. And the pot?
The pot was my Bobba's, my father's mother, who lived to 100.
Wow.
She was a wise old lady, and everybody was afraid of her except me, and I think that's because I was her favorite.
Sweet. So she brought that with her to South Africa, and now it's made the journey to Dallas.
Correct.
All right, that's the story of our lives, isn't it?
Yeah.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Tell us about your children, and I'm sure they've been back to South Africa very often, and how they feel about the two countries.
So it's very interesting that you asked that question, because they are full-on American. I mean, they don't think of themselves as anything other than Americans. However, they have such a pride and joy in telling that they were actually born in South Africa. They love that part of their that they are South African by birth. They really cherish it. It's the first thing out of their mouths when somebody says, "Oh, your parents speak funny," and they'll say, "Well, we were born in South Africa." That is the first thing that they will tell.
And have they taken their spouses to visit?
Well, Lance has been. When Hazel was 3 months old, we all went, but they were the only ones married. And every year, believe it or not, for the last 6 years, we've been growing as a family, and we've been having babies. And nobody has wanted to travel with babies to South Africa, but we are, please God, planning next December to go for 2 weeks, everybody.
Wonderful.
So Lawrence is actually working on booking that at the moment. But so that's our plan, to take everybody, because Cheryl, our daughter-in-law, and Sam have not been. And so we are looking forward to that.
Now, you're lucky in that Lawrence's entire family,
Right.
immediate family, lives in
Right.
Dallas. Tell us a little more about that. Who came and when?
So we came in '82, Brian and Merle and Patricia and Howard. Actually, Patricia and Howard came 3 years after we did. And Brian and Merle came to visit. They had their green card for 3 years already, and they would just come every year. They weren't ready to leave South Africa. Well, what happened is, when they got to DFW Airport, the immigration official looked at their papers and said, "But you have a green card, why aren't you living in Dallas or in the States?" And they said, "Well, they're busy packing to get ready to leave." And they said, "Sorry." They confiscated their passports, and they were not able to leave the country. Well, a legal battle ensued, and they were able to get their passports back, but they were told that if they left the country, their green cards would be revoked. So they basically came on vacation and never left.
And did they bring their children with them?
They did have their children.
Fortunately.
Well, just one. They only had one child. David was the only one at the time. Merle actually was pregnant with Matthew at the time, but nobody even knew that, nor did she. And so they just stayed and had all their things packed up for them and shipped over. So within a matter of a few weeks, all 4 of them were now here to stay. And then Lawrence's parents, there was no reason for them to stay in South Africa anymore. And I think it was about 2 years later that his parents finally packed up and joined us all here.
Wow. Thank you. Anything else we should add? No? All right.